I'm Sarah Renee Clark and I'm back again with another children's colouring book challenge where I take a kid's colouring page and colour it like I would usually colour an adult colouring page with my professional pencils, markers and the adult colouring techniques that I teach you on this channel. Last time I tried this, I printed a Disney colouring page from the internet and I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. You can check out that video here. So we're doing it again, but this time I've raided my own kids colouring book collection and I'm going to be colouring straight from the book. Big black lines and all. Right now, my family and I are in quarantine. So I can't leave the house and I'm working with a 6-year-old downstairs and a 2-year-old in the next room. So instead of the video that I did have planned, I decided to embrace my inner child today and found the perfect colouring book to sum up life in Australia with 2 little kids. Bluey. Bluey has quickly become an Australian icon in the households of every family in the country, and it's a show that we love. And by we, I mean us parents, possibly even more than the kids that it's made for. The characters and scenes are beautifully illustrated, the storylines are so relatable for kids and parents, and it sums up growing in Australia better than any kids show I've seen.
I'm doing this for my kids.
No, Bluey is not sponsoring this video. We're just big fans. So we bought our kids this Bluey colouring book and they've made a start, but it needs an artistic touch. My first challenge is going to be finding a page that doesn't have 2-year-old scribbles all over it. So before I start, I've snapped a quick photo of my page on my iPad so I can draft up some ideas digitally in the Procreate app before I start colouring on my actual page. I like to do this because it gives me more confidence that the final page will look good with the colours I've chosen and the positioning of my lighting. And because I'm colouring in the book, I can't just reprint this page if I don't like how it's turning out, so the digital version acts as a draft. When I coloured Tiana in my last video, I really tried to stay true to the colours of the scene I was working with, but I want to try to bring my own style to this scene. So other than the main characters, I want to use some other colour inspiration and new colours for our background instead of looking to the show itself. I'm looking at some different forests on Pixabay that I can use as a reference photo, mainly focus on the colours they are using, and this one really stands out to me. I love the mix of reds, oranges, browns and greens and the warm sun coming from the back. So I'm going to use this as my inspiration. Here's a nifty little trick. You can actually drag a photo into Procreate and it will automatically pull a selection of colours for you. Very cool. I didn't even realize when I chose this image that my colouring page has branches across the ground just like this photo. How perfect is that? Now that I've got my digital draft, I've chosen some markers from my collection that seem to match the colours I'm expecting to use. I've been watching some of ADC Art Attack's videos recently where he recommends pro markers, and I remembered that I bought a bunch of pro markers on sale for $1 each at a local shop a few months ago and I have never used them. These markers are basically vintage. They are, I think, the original pro markers before Winsor & Newton bought the brand. And check out the colours that these just happen to be. From the small range that I ended up buying, these are a perfect match for today's project. So let's add them to our swatch alongside the Ohuhu and Copic markers I'm planning to use. I've also got a little storybook here from my son that works as another handy reference image so that we can get our characters' colours right. And because I'm using alcohol markers that will most definitely bleed through this colouring book paper, I'm adding a page of bleed-proof paper underneath so it doesn't ruin the rest of the book. Okay, let's begin. Oh, seriously? The first line I start drawing and I've used the wrong colour. Okay, so pro tip, the colourless blender. If you do stupid things like I've just done, you can use the colourless blender to dilute your marker and reduce the colour. It won't completely erase what you've done, but it does a pretty good job on most colours. My plan for this page is to do a base layer with markers and then do my details with coloured pencils. This method has become my favourite way to colour all of my colouring pages in the last few months. It means you get the benefits of the vibrant markers with no white gaps underneath, but the detail and blending of the coloured pencils. I'm really not off to a good start here. How is it that I can't seem to stay within these giant black lines? I'm totally off my game today. I'm sorry, Bluey. Luckily, this is just the undercoat. The first time I used an alcohol marker on a double-sided page like this, I panicked when I started seeing the artwork from the back of the page. But don't worry, it only shows while the marker is wet and will disappear once it dries. For the forest, we're using the greens and browns I've chosen instead of the forest colours from Bluey. Those are more of a green and blue. I like the red ground in our reference photo I found, so I'm going to do similar and use my burnt umber pro marker for the ground. This is actually a really nice colour. I like this. Because the markers are just a base layer here, perfect blending isn't as important because I'll be going over this with pencils later. However, I still like things to look good at this stage. The better this looks, the less work I have to do later, and the more confident I can feel about my progress. Okay, I'm not really sure how to approach this tree, so I'll give this some more thought as we bring in the pencils. With the base colours done, this isn't looking too bad so far. In fact, I could probably stop here and this would look okay. But that is not my plan today. Instead of our wonderful 2D design like the original Bluey cartoon, I'm planning to bring in some realistic 3D shading and interesting lighting with my Prismacolor pencils. Let's start somewhere easy, the dark background areas. My main goal with pencils is to build up my shadows, add highlights, and create texture. I've chosen my Prismacolors here because they seem to work well on any paper I use, whether it's good quality paper or just basic paper from a colouring book. And they blend really well, which I love. When choosing my colours, I try to find a base colour similar to my markers, and then I can choose my highlights or my shading colours around that. The base colour means I can blend those shadows into my markers much more smoothly, and because of our marker layer, we don't have to use as much pencil and I don't need to burnish anything because there's no white page to hide underneath. Now for the tree. You'd think I'd know how to colour a tree after creating my own colouring books for the past 6 years, but yet, as I'm thinking about how to approach this, I'm realising I have never coloured a tree in. Ever. So even as a professional, every colouring page comes with surprises and challenges, and today, this is my new challenge. My dilemma here is that this cartoon tree is essentially one giant smoothed out shape, but a real tree is made up of hundreds of leaves being hundreds of smaller shapes, each bouncing light and shadows of their own. So how can I portray depth here and texture while also showing the light source coming from the back of the tree? When I find myself approaching something totally new like this, where I feel a little lost, I start by finding a reference image. In this case, I would look for some photos of trees or to see how the light works, or I could look at how other people have coloured or even painted trees to learn from their methods. The rest of this background so far is reminding me a little bit of a colouring book I've just bought, which is the Thomas Kinkade Disney colouring book for adults. So I decided to see how he approaches painting trees because they might give me a better idea of how to recreate something with light and shade. By the way, I was thinking of colouring something from this book in a future video, so let me know in the comments if that's something that you would like to watch. And looking closely at some of his trees, I can see that they appear to be made up of a lot of small shapes, almost like circles or dots, of light and shade, almost at random. So I'm going to take this idea of circles of light and shade and see if this works to create depth in our tree. So far, it looks a bit strange, but I'll use some mid-greens to blend these new shadows and lighting so they aren't so distinct, and let's see how that goes. Meanwhile, I also want to try to bring more light on my left and more shadows on my right to keep that overall illusion of the lighting coming from the left. It's not perfect, but hey, I'm actually surprised at how well that worked. And with that, I think we can move on to the road. Our road color was inspiration from our reference photo, so let's look again at the texture that was a part of that image too. I think the best way to recreate this is going to be to add lots of little dots of light and then shade around these. I think I'm gonna regret adding so many of these. With our light source from behind, our characters will also be casting a shadow, and there will be heavier shadows behind a lot of the fallen leaves and tree roots along the path. I'm really happy with how this is all turning out so far. I'm tempted to leave this like this with our realistic background and 2D cartoon characters, but I really want to see how Bluey, Bingo and Bandit look if we bring them some shading too. I want to start with our light source. Colouring light always makes me a bit nervous, but it is also the part of a colouring page that I find the most exciting because it brings a new level of interest to a page. In this case, I'm using the warm light of the sun coming from behind our characters. So we've got the warm light from the back, which means any shadows will fall towards the front. I don't want to shade them too heavily because I really love the colours of these characters already. So I've just chosen a slightly darker shade of each colour to do the shadows in each section. By the way, I've got a whole video about the different types of shadows that I add to pictures like this if you want to check it out. You can learn what each shadow is, how they work, and use them as a bit of a checklist to create realistic lighting on any picture, and it's not as hard as it looks. I'll pop a link in the description below. What a difference from the original line art to our final picture with just some markers and pencils. I actually enjoyed colouring this more than some of the adult colouring books I've done. Just because a book is labelled as a kids colouring book doesn't mean it's just for kids. And colouring is definitely not just a children's activity. What a fun way to build your drawing skills, extend your creativity, and get through a crazy season like what most of us are in right now. If you'd like to see me do more colouring challenges like this, please subscribe and tell me in the comments what you'd like to see me colour next. I think I'll cut this out of this book now though, before it ends up with more decorations from our 2-year-old son.
Uh-oh.